again, it's worth exploring to see what else is available. Gretchen, you're on mute.
Thank you. I see that Sarah wrote "be right back" in the chat, but she also found an important change this week, so we can circle back to that when Sarah is likely back from having fun with Ryan post bedtime. Okay, so so next up for the DOI climate change page are to look at, there have been previous changes to it, which we last reported on in 2017, but to look at the evolution of the page, find out what other climate related resources there are, like through DOI and the agencies within DOI, and then, potentially start a report on what is there, what more should be there, that sort of thing. And see where that takes us. And the next, when Sarah's back, we'll get back to her change as well. Next up, report writing. Marcy, you want to give a rundown of report writing? You're muted.
So we did, Gretchen, what was the date that you put out the report on sage grouse? It was right before Christmas or something?
It was the 21st? Mm-hmm. 20th or 21st?
So that finally got steering committee approval and went out. And we did find one reference at a Pacific Standard, and I don't know that much about that media outlet. It was online. I don't know what other kind of presence it has, but someone definitely picked it up and wrote a pretty extensive piece about it. So that's one highlight. And then we're still waiting for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Elizabeth Sjogren, to come back to us. She sent a New Year's greeting, sort of, and said she was going to be getting to it this month. So we'll see. And then, of course, I guess, Gretchen, you're going to talk about some of the new report ideas, options that just came up in terms of the shutdown and what we're seeing there as well. Of course, a different kind of report.
Yeah, for that one, so one thing that we had kind of brought up in the research team meeting was the DOI climate change page, and the other is the interesting decision for a redirect from some NOAA sites, like, let's see where Marcy found that.
Eric posted a couple I think Rob picked up on too.
Yeah, so this is, I'll show everyone what it looks like. So rather than having a banner across the top of the page, which like almost all agency pages have, of like, this website isn't being updated due to the government shutdown or, whatever else. Rob, maybe you can tell us what you found about like how many sites are doing this. But at least this, fair number of NOAA sites, actually like their website is inaccessible, not just not being updated. during this government shutdown.
Right, and unlike what we were seeing with EPA, which just has this repeat header on the pages, but everything's still there, this is totally different.
Yeah.
So I can say, so Brendan ran, so we took some of the site mapping stuff that we built with Crawler and ran it against all of the NOAA subdomains, of which we have like 50. There's a crazy number of NOAA subdomains. Anyway, so we ran it against all of them. A lot of pages are blocked this way. I haven't actually added up all the numbers yet. It's not everything. I mean, there are still some pages you can actually browse to that just have a banner or a notice, but I think if I remember, it was something like there's like 200 pages that you can still see, and like a lot of other pages that are blocked this way so that you can't get any content from them. But I have the map we generated, so what I need to do is actually run the numbers on it and see how many. We haven't done anything for the rest of all the sites that we monitor. We could do a similar mapping run on all of them. It would probably take a while. Mm-hmm. And the piece of information we're kind of missing is what does the similar page like this look like on all those other sites? And or how would we reasonably figure out how to identify it, not having seen it yet? Because they'll all be different, right? And I had some like great theoretical ways to do it, and then I realized that even this NOAA one conforms to none of the things that I would have identified on my first theoretical way to identify them. Like, it actually doesn't say shutdown in it anywhere. The terminology it uses is stuff that is sort of non-specific enough to sort of be hard to reliably identify as like this event, because it's just like lack of funding or something on it. I don't remember exactly what it was that it said. But anyway, so we'd have to figure out how to sort of like identify what the similar page on other sites would look like in order to figure out how many pages are sort of like gone. But
Rob,
we at least did it for NOAA.
So I have a question for Noah, and for you and Dan especially. Is there any, since we didn't see it's not wholesale across NOAA, right? I mean, is there a certain pattern that could be ascertained about some sort of logic that was used to decide which ones to redirect or not? Like, was it just, you know what I mean?
This is the same. We've run the technical operation, and now somebody has to put eyes on the data and calculate the numbers and see whether there are patterns or anything.
Okay.
Coming at this from a totally different direction, I have a couple friends at NOAA that so maybe I should try that.
Definitely. Is there anything we could help with in terms of the analysis, Rob and Dan, too? I mean, you said it needs eyes on it. Is this something that non-dev eyes could be put on to help?
There's basically a giant JSON file with data about all the pages and all the links and how they link to each other. So if you want to wade through that, but it might be something you want to write some code to do, because there's probably a lot of entries, and it's just a giant wall of text. Really.
How many entries? Like order of magnitude?
I haven't opened the file yet. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just intrigued by, is somebody pushing a button somewhere for a certain thread of sites?
I wonder if it's random, or I wonder if it's the data transfer costs at NOAA are high because they do have very large data sets. And I've read just through the news that the quality of weather predictions have gone down, and some of my scientist Twitter feed is mad about ability to access climate-related data sets right now. I don't know. Maybe Edge is already on top of that.
I doubt anybody's more on top of it than us. We're just going to talk about it in a more timely way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
That's really interesting. We should.
Yeah, I'll engage with some friends on that and try to circle back with you guys.
That'd be great, Dan. Thanks.
Oh, and Sarah's back. Great. Sarah, do you want to present your important change that you found this week?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. It's on here on compliance on the important changes doc. I don't really know how you guys go about doing these presentations. But essentially it's changes in language from enforcement to compliance. So it's really sort of just a tone change in two places, emphasizing compliance rather than enforcement. So the first one didn't prep anything. The first one is just a title change. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I pulled up the wrong thing. Maybe we can start with the second one since I can find that link easier, and I found it today. So this is just that case of the National Enforcement Initiative being renamed National Compliance Initiative. And then there's some changes further down here too, basically a deletion of goals to look at air emissions from storage tanks. So I don't know, this maybe could be to do with change of direction, or they achieved this in 2018 or something. But basically it's been weakened as to the specifics of what their goals are. So you can see under that goals section, most of the text, that there's still text on toxic air pollutants and leaks from flares. But it's not this focus on storage tanks, which, you know, might tie to underground storage for natural gas, where there's been this big problems recently with leaking from underground natural gas storage in California. And there was a recent study looking at the infrastructure for these natural gas underground storage tanks, basically showing that most of them are really poorly maintained. So I don't fully understand the background here, but just at least this shift from enforcement to compliance seems to maybe tie to the weakening of enforcement. And the other change is a similar kind of thing. Is that sort of what you need to hear from me?
That's pretty comprehensive.
Thanks, Jake. That's really helpful.
Great. But it's crazy. I mean, that's an important change. We've seen, like, I mean, Eric, you probably have seen more loosening of language across EPA domains like this. It's been a little while, but I seem to recall similar types of things across other areas to do with compliance and enforcement specifically.
Yeah, and the other change, sorry, I've managed to pull it up finally here, is just the loss of this link to the National Enforcement Initiative. And the so just, it's just a loss of link to what the initiatives are around enforcement. So it might make a good follow-up to the sheep in the closet piece that Interviewing just released, and maybe a conversation with Interviewing about it would be good.
Sarah, did you happen to check whether the page it linked to is still live?
I did check, and I think it is still live.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and again, I think there might have been a name change there. If you link on it, it's now the National Compliance Initiatives, not the National Enforcement Initiatives. I don't know if that's a change too. Yeah, and it actually says underneath it, National Compliance Initiatives renamed from National Enforcement Initiatives.
Yeah, it's significant.
That's super significant.
Yeah, I think they did have a press release and stuff about like the renaming and the reason for the renaming.
How long ago, do you remember?
I'm trying to remember. It might have been this summer, but I can look it up. I'm not sure.
There's an interesting sentence if you continue down this page. The improved program will be named the National Compliance Initiatives Program, a name which better conveys the overarching goal of increased compliance and the use of not only enforcement actions, but the full range of compliance assurance tools. The full range of compliance assurance tools. Well, I guess at least they let people know about it, which is kind of good.
Yeah, I just dropped this memo that it seems like came out about this transition from national enforcement initiatives to national compliance initiatives. It might be the interviewing. Did anybody read the interviewing report really thoroughly? They might have mentioned this in that report.
Yeah, so they mentioned and cited the memo from an administrator named, I think, Susan Bodine, who essentially mandated this change from national enforcement to national compliance, and that was in late August that happened. So, it's relatively recent, but documented. This is very similar to a change, Gretchen, you found, a couple months ago on the water quality side of enforcement. So it's clearly rolling out.
Doesn't look like we're skipping up this page with way back, so I also set that up to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think these are all coming together nicely for a report on enforcement related changes. Okay, so back down the agenda, dev team. Any updates or things you want to share or ask or anything?
I think overall it's been slow most of the last month for people. I know from my part, I thought I would be able to use the holidays to get a lot done. And instead, I kind of felt a little bit burned out and wound up not getting a whole lot done. So not a whole lot new to report from here.
Yep, nice to see you all again. Been a while. Coming back after the holidays.
It is nice to see everybody. Research team, Eric, you want to give a rundown?
Yeah, so we met, did we meet on Monday? Yeah, it's just this Monday. Time flies. And that was our first meeting after the break, first meeting in a little while. And we essentially recapped where we stood on some work we've been doing with the term analysis. So understanding how terms have changed across many websites over the past 2 years. We kind of set a plan for moving forward with that analysis and visualizing some of those term changes. So we've got a pretty good sense of how we want to write that up and what's going to be in there. At this point, it's a matter of, well, there are a few things, but bringing in some of the results, especially the numbers, writing up a bit more detail about some of the cases we're going to pull out and to illustrate the numbers. And we have Stephen Braun lined up to do a little bit of visualization of the numbers as well. So all in all, some really exciting stuff. We had some good conversation around, well, how do we translate this into something policy digestible, something that will resonate in the current conversations around around policy right now, and others should feel free to jump in here. I don't think we had any. We're not to the point where we have like a solid answer there, but we have we brainstormed some ideas. But there's just in this analysis we did a lot of changes that we hadn't seen before. A lot of kinds of changes that I hadn't really thought about before, but that came apparent in digging through some of the changes. So it's been a fruitful exercise.
One of the axes of like analysis we're looking at is like how any differences between how regulatory agencies versus non-regulatory agencies have like their kinds of web changes differed, and kind of the use of more polarizing terms versus not, and some of those are like have seemed like more fruitful than others, but yes, there's like lots of different like angles of slicing the data.
I'm not sure whether Eric was referring to this when he talked about things that we just sort of brainstormed about, but one of them was just a little bit about, okay, so we have all this amazing analysis that's happening. So how is this going to get deployed in terms of reports and outreach and distribution strategies? So that's something that's, I think, still out there to be sort of figured out and determined, and this notion of having something comprehensive versus maybe some short form, term by term, little intriguing, blogs or short reports. Just sort of thinking about format, and then again, which we really haven't talked about. We haven't really talked about distribution strategy, but it may be different than what we've been using for our other type of web monitoring reports.
Okay, next in the agenda for analyst team, priority algorithms, how are they going? One thing that Rob noted that the dev team would love is any significant changes that have a low priority value. So to kind of like start thinking about how to tune into those and maybe increase the priority value or something along those lines. And so if anybody has any examples of those where they found a significant change that had a kind of surprisingly low value, any examples of those?
Well, one thing to do is to look at the things that we're posting on the important changes doc. And Sarah had one of hers this week had a 0.1 something, and she considered it significant, right? So
yeah, it was that drop of the link one, the second one we talked about.
So why would that get a low score? Out of curiosity, is it just because it's like a change to a menu that's consistent across the domain, or what's the thought there?
I think probably because it was just one link.
Yeah, I think that the total text.
Yeah.
One thing we talked about in the dev meeting earlier today is potentially adding a column that would indicate if there are changes in text, links, or just HTML source.
Mm-hmm.
The priority value is the compilation of those, but if you see a low value and it's a link change, you might still want to view it. But if it's a 0.105 and it's text change, that is likely like a date stamp or something.
Right. And by we, Rob did all the work, but in a half-hour conversation in which I weighed in on what work I thought was a good idea, we decided to compress that into one number to not explode the number of columns in the spreadsheet. But once we're primarily working on a UI, then why not have all the information? And it's obviously adding things that have different units when you talk about text changes versus link changes and so on, right? So it's like, it's a very compressed representation, probably a useful one to have one number to look at, but it's definitely easier and more accurate to explode this into many different signals that you can hopefully take in some visual way. So I imagine that's the long game.
What's the highest number?
It's on a 0 to
we've
1 scale.
seen? No, I mean, what's the highest number we've actually seen in terms of our changes? So I see that Gretchen actually posted one that had a 0.57, which is way higher than anything I've ever seen. But I was just wondering if we can sort of pull out sort of the highest one, just sort of to see if what it looks like.
I did a bunch of spot checking with this last week just to see, like, are all of the changes we're seeing shut down banners being added? And pretty much I think the answer is yes, at least for not for this round, but for last week's changes. And I saw a bunch in the like 0.64, but it was, 100% of the text had changed because it was going from oh, maybe I did see those like totally shut down ones. Now that I think about it, I saw some 0.64s, and it was 100% of the text had changed, is what it seemed like.
That's interesting. It should be getting a higher score than that.
That's what I was wondering.
I'll find those. They were a bunch in the in DOI. I'll go.
Yeah, those would be some good examples to feedback to the dev folks, right?
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I mean, I probably couldn't easily go back and find it, but off the top of my head, the highest score I remember seeing in a actual case in our data was 0.68, but I haven't been paying close attention to the scores that we're generating.
Thanks.
At some point, I would like to run all of the changes that led to reports through this system too, and see what the lowest and like what the distribution of scores is for that. That's an honest.
Or even just all the things in the important changes sheet.
Yeah.
Other things coming are domain streamlining. We're getting steps closer to leaving the old kind of random versionista seed crawl domain names behind, and to be able to kind of have fewer overall scanner output sheets and have them kind of make sense in terms of agency and domain nesting. And so this, I think maybe this coming week, or kind of whenever it's possible to change this, it'll be the outputs will be for like an agency and a domain. So there might be a lot of outputs for this coming week, and we can look at how many different how many changes there are in any given domain, and then start consolidating them so that each kind of compilation of domains is of a reasonable size. So my thought for this coming week is to basically like look at what each person is monitoring now and make sure that you're basically monitoring the same thing when it's kind of reassigned into these new names of domains. And I'll of course like communicate what those names will be and all of that. But the goal is basically to have kind of a more intuitive and structured approach to the domains. Any thoughts or concerns or ideas on a better streamlining approach? Okay, cool.
Will they still be on the same sheet, Gretchen? So we still refer to the domain allocation sheet?
I'll make a new tab in the domain allocation sheet that kind of will map where like the majority of pages go as best I can. And yeah, and I think it would also be worth making a new tab in people's analyst sheets for the new. Yeah, it seems like there's not a whole lot I don't think it's like a huge amount is gained by having different tabs for different domains versus it's just like having it all in your one same sheet, in a main tab. But I know that some people prefer to have the different tabs just for like kind of organization purposes. And so if that's something that is of use to you, I think a new tab might be helpful, but it's all going to kind of be compiled into the same place anyway, eventually into the important changes doc. But I'll make a new domain allocation just to kind of see where we map.
So from the technical side for next week, did you want the sheets to now be named by the actual domain of the page rather than the versionista domain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
There will be a lot more sheets.
I know. That's
Okay.
the one thing. How many? Is it going to be total chaos with that? It might be.
It's been a while since I listed out for myself all the unique domain names that we have, but it's hundreds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe let me think on that and get back to you tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So we only have 10 minutes left. Then, so this part, I don't think we really need discussion on. It's more of a just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page about the kind of foci that we selected for this coming year. And I'll post that in Slack, and we can start discussions there if there are any other, if there are topics that aren't listed here that should be, oh wait, I think I didn't even list water. Did I forget to list water? No, I did. Okay. Or that that maybe we, if we wanted to streamline more, that we wanted to not include in this year's kind of focal topics. But we can have that discussion in Slack, because I did want to start a discussion and get people's brains on some of the things that we'll be talking about in the in-person meeting on, not this coming weekend, but the next weekend. The Susie and Suleika are the consultants that are working with us on organizational effectiveness, and they put together a draft agenda, which is linked here. And they have some really interesting discussion topics. And so I'd love for us to be able to start some of those discussions amongst the team, so that those of us that are in the in-person meeting can also be ambassadors for the broader team, and the thoughts that people carry with those topics. So the first discussion topic for the weekend that I think is really interesting is clarifying and articulating EDGI's collective purpose in the world. And so not just thinking about web monitoring, but our broader purpose. Are there any things that come to mind that percolate?
Actually, one of the things that just came to my mind was in looking at the Pacific Standard reference to us initially, where they did the link to the report, they called us an advocacy group. So I guess there's a question about, are we an advocacy organization? Are we a watchdog organization? How do we want to bill ourselves?
I was going to ask about watchdog organization too. I see that in the news. I don't feel like a watchdog organization. Could we be a watch cat organization? That's threatening.
Not you. How about watch puppy? Well, that sort of hit me when I saw that reference to us. I went, oh, advocacy group? No. So that could maybe fit into the discussion.
It'd be kind of cool to go through as many articles about Edgy as we can and see how we've been described.
That's a good idea.
If only we had some sort of monitoring system for occurrences of the word edgy and yeah.
And of course, I mean, there are questions about the different threads of what we do and whether, those will have different monikers but then what does that mean about overall? So.
The one of the things that I think kind of is a glue that holds Edgy together in a shared purpose is just kind of information sharing from multiple different avenues, but the sharing information about public information, for our work, safeguarding information with the archiving work, and thinking about how information should be sharing thoughts and ideas and resources on the kind of power of information and how that can best be utilized. And I think about like environmental data justice, but I think of us sort of as like an informational service in some ways. So consider the second question of the day on Saturday the 19th that I think also kind of has a relationship to that first question is also like, in different future scenarios, does our, is our purpose different in different scenarios? Like what does Edgy become in a world with like a different, various sort of like, overarching political structures or, like how, does who we are depend on, what's going on in the broader world?
It certainly formed the foundation of who we are.
Just gonna say the same thing, yeah. I mean, certainly one of.
Go ahead.
Is just being a utility with our web monitoring technology, right? With scatter, that's part of, I think, the underlying kind of mechanical part of the web monitoring project is for there to be a Wikipedia, if you will, of checking government agency websites or any websites for that matter that provide some kind of public good.
Marcy, what were you going to say?
I guess maybe this is sort of a sub topic, but it's the notion of sort of the rudder or the keel of who we are, maybe overall. But then, how do we see ourselves at critical moments of time, or at certain moments in time, and what does that mean about how we interact with the world and the public? I mean, to a certain extent, we have right now with the new House majority and with a focus on climate in the House, right? This is a moment in time for something, for us to do something, I think. And what is that beyond, perhaps educating the new members of the House about what EDGI has done, who we are, what contributions we can continue to make. But so sort of a variation on scenario. I mean, but
I think that's a good point and should inform those things like the dissemination of reports. Okay, so let's keep thinking about all of those. And 8:59, this is awesome. The other announcement is that Sarah Wiley has a class that will be joining us. Sarah, do you want to give a quick, minute or two overview?
Sure. So the class is for graduate students in sociology, and it's to prepare them for thinking very broadly about environmental health. So I can share the syllabus, but the readings will look very distant from web monitoring. It's things on like the history of how neoliberal forms of governance emerged and how they think about environmental resources, and ethnographies of big major environmental events like the Bhopal disaster, which one of the biggest toxic events in history, and it led to the right to know movement in the US and is the reason why we have the toxics release inventory, because following the Bhopal disaster, there was a realization that the chemical that was released there that killed thousands of people was also produced in the States by exactly the same chemical manufacturer with exactly the same layout of the plant, and there wasn't any banning or regulation of that chemical in the US. So the class is really meant to give them a sense of the history of environmental health problems, and then the web monitoring, it's also trying to be a more applied learning class. So I actually want them to think about exactly the questions you were just raising, Gretchen, as like, what is the practice or the relationship of democracy and web monitoring and this new ability to see the state, because they'll be looking at how does the state see its citizens, how does it count people through the census and distribute resources, and then how does the emergence of the web and tools like we're using in web monitoring let citizens see the state and monitor the state differently. So for the first half of the course, they're going to be web monitoring. For their midterm, they need to produce a summary of what they found through the web monitoring, but also connect it to the readings and the theories we've been thinking about how states relate to their citizens and different forms of democratic governance. And then I hope that the final paper will be a collaboratively written research paper kind of about the theory and practice of web monitoring that they could bring forward to you guys to see if it's interesting, what you think of it, if it's something that you guys would like to further develop as like an academic publication about these questions of like what kind of form of democratic power is web monitoring offering. That's kind of what I was thinking, and that paper may not go anywhere or may not fit for you guys, but for them it's really just an exercise in applying what they're learning for the class. And if it's interesting and something you would want to take forward as an academic publication, that's something that I would love to pick up at the end of the class if that interests you all.
It's fascinating. Would it, I hate to volunteer the dev people, but would it be helpful to them to at least get an orientation to what the dev folks are doing?
Yeah, I think so, though they have no technical background. You know, they're not programmers, and I don't like.
And I was thinking more in terms of sort of the bigger view, which Dan and Rob can both speak to. You know, just the origins of their work and how they're.
Yeah, and how it builds on different open source systems.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think that would be fantastic. And, you know, maybe Dan and Rob, they could ask you about some of those things that could inform some part of the paper down the line, if that's something you guys are interested in doing.
Yeah, I'm happy to spend time talking to people about that.
Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I think Edu's written academically about lots of its other practices like data rescue, but we haven't really theorized what it is to web monitor.
Right.
And that's sort of what I was hoping they could try and bring or trying to make some space for.
That's great. You said there are 4 in the class?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They'll also be looking at structures of classification and the consequences of them. So that conversation we had earlier about how, you know, you might have a small change, but it's still significant, like the fact that no classification system is ever perfect. They'll be thinking about some of those questions too, which might be interesting. And so I'll be sharing all of the readings in a Dropbox, and any of you guys will be welcome to come to a class session or do some of those readings if they're interesting.
Thank you. Are there particular domains that you care about? Which domains within what we're monitoring now for them?
I don't want to disrupt what you guys are doing or how you already have things distributed. So, you know, I work on fracking and air pollutants associated with fracking and the Clean Water Act. And so those are the domains that I'm sort of interested in, but I think they can get something out of monitoring any domain. So really whatever fits best, I think, for you all.
Great, thanks.
Looking
forward to this.
In the previous class that did some monitoring, we generated special spreadsheets for them. So they worked off a slightly different set of things than we do every week. We built a spreadsheet for, I think, NASA and 1 or 2 other agencies for all the pages from them that we monitor that covered the changes from sort of like all time for those. So let me know if you need special tasking sheets for the class.
What's your guys' feeling on that? The class is specific to environment and health, so it's sort of important for me that they are monitoring something associated with environment and health. And I would prefer for them to be kind of engaged in, you know, the culture of the web monitoring group, with the hope that some of them would want to stay on and continue past the class. Particularly because they are all graduate students at Northeastern, so we can support them to continue to do that if they want to. So I was leaning towards integrating them as kind of full members, but if that's going to be disruptive, I'm open to not doing that.
No, I think that it would be great to have them come to the meetings, be, you know, on the team. I think that sounds really wonderful. And I think that just jumping in, we've got enough domains that I think jumping in with, you know, and they'll just take kind of the, you know, yeah, I think them just jumping in right as normal would be great.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm really excited about it. I'll be sharing the syllabus tomorrow. Their first class meets tomorrow. So we'll onboard them over this next week, I guess. So, and I'm going to see about the feasibility of them making this meeting. They'll either be a representative of the students each time, or all 4 of them will be joining if they can.
Great.
That's great.
Me too.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you all so much. Happy 2019, and we'll see you later.
Good. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye.